Welcome to another episode of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've often talked in this show that companies are feeling a huge amount of pressure today. Competition, with the disruption, with things like the pandemic that just ended. We're seeing external events like the war, and to keep in news, tools like ChatGPT have really disrupted the way we look at things and how many of the industries are going to be defined. Now, what that does, the corollary to that is, of course, that a lot of the companies are feeling immense pressure to stay ahead of the competition, to figure out, what comes next. And therefore, innovation becomes such a big part of their DNA or their strategy. Now, innovation is a buzzword and everybody talks about it, right? But how do you actually create it? Is it the environment? Is it the teams? There's a lot of work done on that. But at the core of innovation is also fundamentally just trying to come up with something very, very different, something very unique, something faster than perhaps your competition. And all of that perhaps pushes the case or calls for the case of being creative in some way. And there is so much work done on the subject and the topic of creativity. So we want to dwell today in our episode to understand all dimensions of creativity and why creativity itself has become such a big and mainstream part of all conversations, and especially in the context of Gen Z. And to help us talk about that is my guest and expert on creativity, Andrew Grant. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Thank you, Andrew. And so, as we've done, friends, with all our episodes, before I ask all my questions to Andrew, I'm going to quickly take 2 minutes to read the very rich background that Andrew comes about. And so Andrew is an author, keynote speaker who is best known for his innovative culture development work with top companies around the world. Andrew and his partner, Dr. Gia Grant, have spent 30 years traveling the world to look at very creative cultures, identifying why is it that some societies and companies seem to have raced ahead with innovation while others appear to be have left behind. He has worked with a range of organizations from Fortune 500 companies to education institutes and not-for-profit to help build future leaders. He's also the founder and director of consulting company Attaining International. It was founded with the belief that many companies are facing an unprecedented creativity crisis that risks hobbling the economy, competitiveness, and society, a huge threat in the face of daily reports of problem productivity and high labor costs. Andrew is an extremely sought-after leadership and team developer speaker for multinational companies, and he's the go-to expert on creativity for BBC, Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, CCTV, Reuters, Financial Review, and many more. So that's a brief of what the background Andrew brings. Andrew, welcome again, and great to be reconnected. So Andrew, before we get into understanding all dimensions of creativity, as I always do at the start of the show, can you please, again, in addition to the brief bio that I just read, can you tell us a little more about who you are and what you do?
Well, that was a very long, extensive talk about me, so I won't talk too much about it, but perhaps we can talk about why we got into creative thinking, and that was 20 plus years ago when we started our company. Our background's education. We would always teach using gamification, simulation, experiential learning, and it really brought any message on leadership or team development alive and engaging with the participants. And funnily enough, banks, which you don't necessarily associate with creative thinking, but some of the big Fortune, the big global banks said, look, we love your programs. They're really creative. Could you actually teach us about creativity and creative thinking? And I often remember going into the first bank and said, we're going to learn about creative thinking. And they all said, well, why would I do that? I've joined banking. I'm left brain. I'm not interested in creative thinking. I'm interested in numbers. And that really got us thinking, well, actually, we all need to be creative, because creative thinking is about really joining two novel, unrelated ideas together to come up with something new. And I know you're going to ask me about, why is it important today? But as we know, with AI taking over most of our jobs, I do think that creative thinking will probably be one of the last things that AI will be able to do, because it's not about gathering information and crunching data. Creative thinking is about taking unrelated things that are totally unrelated, than putting them together and coming up with something new. And that requires a very different brain set to crunching data. So, we started 25 years ago. We used to get asked to run these workshops because at conferences, people said, we've done everything else. Why don't we do creative thinking? And I thought, well, that's not a great reason to do creative thinking or design thinking. But now companies are realizing it's really all they've got left. And there's been many surveys, from the famous IBM CEO survey right through to the World Economic Forum, saying the greatest attribute CEOs and leaders are looking for now in the workforce is creative thinking and innovation, the ability to put things together.
Excellent. So thank you again, and what a fabulous journey. And you touched upon it, so perhaps I'm going to double click on that, Andrew, just as a way to kickstart our conversation. I guess perhaps one can argue to say that, the case for being creative was always there or would have been there, but maybe there is more compelling evidence or reasons as to why creativity has become, such a big conversation or gaining so much traction. And as you also touched upon something like AI. So one question to start off, Andrew, is that, how come creativity has gained so much attention? And then in the context of Gen Z, your young first line level managers, right? What relevance does it have for them?
Well, first of all, I think, as you're saying, why is creative thinking more important now than ever? And that is because AI didn't just burst onto the stage yesterday. Like all innovation, as much as we like to hype it, most innovation creeps up on us. It is definitely moving faster than it was 10 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, where people could live a whole generation and not see any change. And if anything, Gen Z are going to see more change in the next 10 years than you and me have seen in our lifetime. So I know it's overused, but the change is exponential, but we need to think about that. So whilst that change is coming through as exponential, we've got to ask ourselves, what skills have we as humans got left to offer into the workforce if data can be crunched and analyzed faster than we can do it? And so I think, at the end of the day, all we're going to have left, and maybe this is a bit dramatic, is that ability to come up with new and novel ideas of connecting things that can't be connected by data. Now, why is it relevant for Gen Z? Well, it's relevant for Gen Z and their managers, because Gen Z, as having kids of Gen Z, are going to be very different to our generation. And we know that they're true digital natives. They're not learning anything. They've grown up with an iPad. There's a great picture of an iPad porta potty. So, the one place sometimes where we had the chance to ponder and be creative, sitting on the potty as a kids, has now been taken up. You can buy an iPad porta potty. So these kids have literally grown up with it in their hands, and so they are truly digital natives. But their consumption is, for that generation, is about access rather than possession. It's about expression of individual identity, and it's about ethical concerns. Now, that's a complete change around to our generation. And if we're marketing to Gen Z, or we're selling to Gen Z, or Gen Z are selling, or we're employing Gen Z, then we need to understand that the whole consumer landscape is changing. And that's going to require creative thinking, because all the things we used to do in the past that worked aren't going to work. If Gen Z are about access rather than possession, they're not really interested in owning things anymore. They're happy to subscribe, for example. Instead of selling 1,000 cars, a company's going to have to sell one car 1,000 times. And so all this change, a shift of looking at the marketplace is going to change, and that's going to require creativity. Now, AI might tell us the shift in data. It might tell us that Gen Z are all about access rather than possession. They're all about individual identity, and they're all about ethical concerns. We can gather that from AI, but what do we do with that information? That information has to now be said, right, this is the new generation. How do we treat them as consumers? How do we treat them as employees? And if you are a Gen Z, how do you deal with us managers that are not Gen Z and won't necessarily have grown up in your world?
Excellent. And you, I think, touch upon a very good point, which is to look at the Gen Z cohort or the generation from a consumer lens, right? Because they're so used to adapting to technology and they want everything quick. And so companies really have to figure out a way to keep them engaged and come up with something new. One follow-up question there, Andrew, was to understand that, there is obviously the case of creativity or innovation perhaps felt more in the technology space, right? Because the shelf life of knowledge or shelf life of anything that they may come up with is so short. What has been your experience when you think about creativity in other industries, just as a general observation? Do you sense that is there still a view that some of these companies, like perhaps, I don't know, maybe like manufacturing or, as you alluded earlier, like banking, what do you find? Do you find that leaders are still of the view that, maybe I don't need creativity, or that's more for the tech space? I'm just curious to hear what have you been
Look,
seeing?
I think unfortunately tech and digital permeates everything now. I mean, you've got examples where one of our clients, Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, they're not allowed to call themselves a car company anymore. So they are a tech company. So I think tech will be permeating all products and everything we consume, obviously to different degrees. But at the end of the day, consumption for Gen Z means having access to products and services, not necessarily owning them. So that's a huge shift in thinking. We worked with a Chinese car company introducing their car brand into Australia. Very interesting story. It was, when it came into Australia, it was ranked, I think, 38 out of 40 cars in Australia, as in it didn't quite come in with great reviews. It came in as an iconic brand, but the reviews were basically calling it a piece of plastic junk. And we had to work with the executive team to bring this car into Australia and rebrand it. We couldn't go back to the factory line and say, hey, the car's not getting great reviews because of the quality of the car. Now, I have no comment on the quality of the car. I'm not a car expert. I'm just telling you the reviews it received, whether they were just or not. But anyway, as we worked through with the car company, trying to get them to understand, well, what can we do differently? They came up with a concept of using its previous brand of a subscription model. And they were a little bit ahead of their time because they weren't necessarily focusing that on Gen Z, although many of the executives were younger than me. So it was really interesting to try and rework a car, which is a physical object, to a new generation and say, well, how do we sell it different? I mean, you had the Korean cars that were offering the 10-year warranties. You had the Japanese cars that were offering incredible no faults. You had the beautiful German cars that were luxury. So what were the Chinese cars going to offer? They couldn't compete on any of those grounds. And so using creative thinking, we helped them come up with that. And recently, the good news is they've now moved into the #1 slot in their competitive in Toyota, and their sales have grown 177%. And I'm not accrediting myself to all of that, but we were there with the first 15 people that kicked off the car in Australia a couple of years ago. But it was that level of looking at the brand, looking at the market, looking at the creative thinking and saying, what can we do differently with a car company that so we're not just repeating and reselling another car. And that was the creative thinking, which is very different to Six Sigma. Creative thinking is, I hate to say it, thinking outside the box. It's a very different looking for ideas where nobody else is looking into that blue ocean. And to come up with a subscription model, I know cars are now doing it now, but this was the first, as we know it, of its kind. It really blew the market out.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow, what a good story. Just to show that yes, there's a need in other places as well. So you made a very convincing case that there is a need across domains, across industries. Now to the big question, Andrew. What holds us back, or what holds companies back, right? And how can, if you're a manager, you have the pressure of performance, you have the pressure of being ahead of your competitors, right? How do you unblock and maybe unleash your creative potential, and especially for Gen Z, right? So you've done so much work. Yeah, what have you found?
So that method of design thinking, the ability to start with the customer and go through a series of stages, which includes divergent thinking, convergent thinking, ideation, that's been around for a long time, and it's getting better and better, and it's a fabulous tool. But the problem I found is you go into a group and say, we're going to teach you design thinking. Their first attitude is, well, that's not my responsibility. That's another department. And so if we've got, as you mentioned, blocks, we basically gathered all the excuses we had from running these courses for 20 years and thought, well, if we don't deal with these excuses, you call them blocks, we're going to be creative and call them killers, creative killers. If we can't deal with the cultural blocks in the company, perhaps the cultural blocks within a country, what you bring in, and the voices in your own head, or the voices from your leader or your team, if we don't free those up and get people thinking creatively and get them to feel confident to think creatively, then all the design thinking steps in the world won't work. And so we really wanted to preload our more popular workshop on design thinking or creative and critical thinking with a diagnostic workshop in the form of a gamified simulation, because we don't want to talk about being creative without actually being creative. And so we came up with the concept of who killed creativity, like a bit of a murder mystery. And the idea is it's designed to look at what are the things that block creative thinking, what are the things that stop your CQ, which is your creative quotient. There are 7 CQ attributes designed by Paul E. Torrance. And if we don't have a high creative quotient, if we can't tick those 7 attributes, if we can't deal with what we've come up with now, 7 killers or 7 blockers, if we can't recognize those and deal with them, and those voices are in our heads, then all the tools on creative thinking in the world won't work. And we've seen this happen over and over again. I've been to many offices where I got taken up to the top level of a building in Singapore, a large insurance company, 120 years old, that spent millions of dollars on the innovation lab. He took me all around the building and it was, wow, look at this, isn't this beautiful? And oohs and ahs and the beanbag chairs and the free canteen. And then he took me into a corner and said, but it's not working. And I said, well, why? And he said, because no one's actually being creative. And I said, well, you've spent millions of dollars on the hardware. How much money have you spent on the software in terms of, getting people to change their mind, the psychology, the neuroscience behind it? And he said, nothing. And I said, well, you can't just think you can change a culture by replacing the furniture. We have to look at the actual culture. And this is more important for Gen Z than anyone, because Gen Z are hypersensitive to culture. They won't work for a company that's not ethical. They won't work for a company that says one thing about how wonderful they are, but on the other end, they treat people like crap. If Gen Z want to work for companies that have integrity, and we know, we look at the Google canteen as a great freebie, and the Google gymnasium and the Google cleaning, and the fact that you can spend your whole life in Google and be pampered. But this is not just Google being nice. They're not just purely altruistic. Google have done their research and realized that Gen Z want to connect. They don't want the engineering department over there and the sales department over there. Google know that the best creative ideas happen in the canteen. So that rather than rush people through the canteen as quickly as possible and get them back to work where they're being productive, Google know that sometimes if they can create an environment where there's free food, and hey, Gen Z loves free food. I mean, it could be as simple as giving them pizzas and Coke, but it's actually not. There's a need behind that. They want an identity. They want to feel part of a bigger picture. They want to feel meaning in their life, and they want to feel that they're working for something that's going to add meaning. And so it's about creating a culture. Once you've created the culture, then the design thinking, the creativity becomes very simple. And if I'm selling a 2-day workshop to a client and they want 2 days of design thinking, I will beg them, please, can we spend at least 50% on exploring your culture, your CQ skills, the things that block creativity, whether they're voices up here or the environment that you're working in. And then when we get to the design thinking, watch how fast it'll go. And clients have come back to me and said, wow, that last 3 hours, we achieved this and we achieved this and we achieved this. And I said, yes, because we spent day 1 doing the diagnostic. Yeah. So I think it's even more important for Gen Z, because they're all about integrity and meaning in their life.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So Andrew, you've obviously laid out different ways in which you can apply creative thinking, and as you say, don't focus just on the hardware, but on the software, which requires perhaps rewiring or relooking at your own narratives and so on. Now, what's been your experience, right? You work with companies around the world. What's been your experience? In other words, one thing is to say I put them through a workshop or even a very nice, powerful simulation, right? But what's been your experience of saying that, how is there, if I can call it, is there some average time or a duration perhaps to say that, where you get a group of guys who are, on one end of the spectrum to say that, 0 on a scale of 10, that again, not very, very creative or not applying their creativity to the point where they've started looking at things more laterally. Now, how much is that time frame in your experience? I'm sure it's gonna
Oh, that's how much.
yeah.
How long is a piece of string? When we wrote the book Who Killed Creativity and How to Get It Back, we wanted to take, as I said, all the information that we'd gathered from workshops, all the excuses, all the reasons why people said this is not for me, but my boss sent me. I often used to say, why are you here? And I said, you can't use the excuse my boss sent me. And they'd all laugh and go, yeah, but it's true. So as I said, there was no point just teaching creative thinking and design thinking unless we dealt with the real issues, hence the Who Killed Creativity and How Do We Get It Back. But when we wrote the book, we co-authored it with a neuroscientist and a psychologist. So for example, one of the killers is fear. So you can't be creative if you're working in the back part of your brain, which is the primitive part of the brain. If you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that's about getting out of an emergency. Now, that fight, flight, or freeze mode, from a neuroscience perspective, is really important. It's kept us alive for many years if something goes wrong. But when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, there's no room in your brain, there's no bandwidth in your brain to be creative and come up with great ideas. Now the problem in companies, the old companies, because I'm going to just distinguish between the companies that are all about productivity and high KPIs and reaching these stretch targets, they create an environment where people live in a constant state of fear, a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. And you can't spend 5 days of the week putting them in fight, flight, or freeze, the dorsal dive, in fear, and then say on Friday night, you can stay up all night, we're going to do a hackathon or a create-a-thon and give you Coca-Cola and pizza, and by Saturday morning, we expect you to come up with these great ideas. It doesn't work like that. There's got to be some integrity in the process. And so we've got to create environments for people where they can be creative, where they can use the front part of their brain. And that fear is just one of the killers. We've got 7 of them. I can go through them if you like at a later stage, but I'm just taking the example of fear. As long as people are coming to work in fear of goals, fear of risk, fear of the unknown, fear of not reaching their KPIs, psychologically and from a neuroscience perspective, we can't ask them to be creative. It doesn't work. The brain is being overrun by the use of fear. So we must address the culture of fear in the workplace if we want people to be creative. Now, that doesn't mean fear doesn't have its place. I mean, if we're just going to tell people to hang around and brainstorm for 5 weeks, that could be very expensive as well. So there is definitely a balance between the two, but that's just one example of where we've got to be careful in terms of helping people understand what's going to block their creativity. And once we get rid of fear and kick it out, or get rid of the suspect or identify it as a killer and know where it happens around the office, where we hear those, where we get into a paralyzing state of fear, once we can deal with that, then we can go on and be creative. And then the creativity flows naturally. Now, we also learned in our research that 98% of children score high in divergent thinking and creative thinking. Do you know what percent of adults score high? 2%. So we were actually all born with the ability to make those connections, to come up with great ideas. But school, university, and the killers have just sort of, a bit like eating a lot of bad food, we just keep layering up those killers and letting them wander around our brain, letting them wander around the office unchecked. And that's why we think it's really important to deal with the diagnostic side of it and get that CQ high again, get the killers out of our life so we can go on and start rescuing creativity.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, very good point. Now, so obviously it varies, and you talked about fear is such a sort of a blocker, if you will, of coming and unleashing creativity. What has been your experience then, Andrew? Like if you were to look at best in class companies, right? How do they sustain it? In other words, you obviously touched upon the culture, but for example, like if I'm a Gen Z and I'm fortunate to have a good manager who allows me to experiment and try this and try that, but maybe he's not going to be my boss for the rest of my life. But but there are companies who continue to kind of remain in that creative zone year after year after year, right?
Mm.
So, like, how do you sustain it, right? What are the ways, just some ways in which companies can?
I'm smiling because that's going to be the subject of, I think, our next podcast, because my partner, Dr. Jaya Grant's PhD was on sustainable innovation. So I don't know if I want to get into another model, but her whole research in our second book, The Innovation Race, is on actually sustainable innovation, because you're absolutely right. It's, we read about all these breakthrough companies, and we've got a fascination with Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, who are, total outliers and a little bit crazy in what they do, but they fumble through because they've got billions of dollars to burn. But the rest of us, and that's called survivorship bias. Jaya's research actually looked at 60 years of innovation companies, and she interviewed, I think, over 100 innovation offices globally and over 1,000 people on what makes sustainable long-term innovation. And I'll just quickly go into just the top level of her model. Typically with innovation, creative thinking, we always worship and talk about the explorers and the people that want to, go out and have visionary and do all these big things. And that's what we see a lot on the media. As I said, we love to hear about Mark Zuckerberg and his metaverse, where he's just gone off into another world of exploring and coming up with great ideas. But we don't acknowledge that to be, and that's not sustainable, because it just goes off into chaos, and too much freedom goes a bit crazy. For sustainable innovation to happen, you need on an equal side of tension, and it's called the paradox theory, where it's actually a tension of a company between those that want to explore and those that want to preserve. And that tension, that dual leadership or ambidexterity between the exploring and the preserving, is what will pull a company into sustainable long-term innovation, because they're both pulling on each other to make sure they're moving forward. And if you think about it, it's a racing car or a racing track. On one side of the road is the exploring side, on the other side is the preserving side. And a good racing car driver will always use the racing line. They might come right over here and then move right over to this side of the road. And so sustainable innovation is about creating a culture of leadership that allows people to hold in tension the competing demands of exploring and preserving. Too much exploring, you go off into just chaos. Too much preserving, you don't innovate. We know what happens if you don't innovate, you get left behind. But right now, the media is fascinated with over-exploring companies, and they'll come and go. I mean, if we were here 10 years ago, we might be talking about the wonderful innovation of Borders Books and Wang Computers and some of the other companies that are now, or MySpace, the companies that were leading the pack but are not. So we've really wanted to look at what innovation, we call it the innovation race, who wins, who loses, who gets eliminated. But let's look at it over decades, if not centuries, rather than just the latest news in the media. So as I said, it's taking us off on a little bit of a different model, but you're talking about sustainable. It really is the companies that take the innovation leadership seriously. They don't just jump straight to the tools, and they take the culture of innovation and the culture of a company seriously. How long does it take to work in a company with this? Look, it's hard to say. I just worked with another large automotive tech company that their whole staff or their whole high potentials had done creative and design thinking, and the C-level team hadn't. So they kept hearing about agile and prototyping and all these buzzwords, but felt a bit inferior. And so they asked if I could come and run a 2-day workshop with them, where we did the Who Killed Creativity followed by the design thinking. And that was really successful. It was just to bring them up to speed. So I think the danger is that I think all levels of companies need to go through it so they can speak the same language. There's no use just doing it with one level and the top level not understanding it, because there's nothing worse if the middle managers learn all about it and then go to present something to the senior managers and are using words that the senior managers, or models or understanding that senior managers know nothing about. So it definitely has to permeate right through the culture of the company, not just one layer.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, very good point. I really like the concept of ambidexterity, where, do you do too much of exploit versus explore? If you do too much on this side, that's not a good thing as well, as you're saying. And of course, if you're always on trying to be very operational, that's certainly not the best thing to do. So, Andrew, fabulous conversation. I know we could go on and many more questions. I want to, perhaps one question as a way to kind of conclude is to say that, two parts to the question. Now, if you're a hiring manager, right, and trying to take this incoming Gen Zs who are very tech savvy, digital natives, and all of that, right? What are some of the do's and don'ts, just from a creative perspective, as a manager? And then we flip it to say that if I'm a young Gen Zer coming into the workforce, right, what should I be kind of keeping in mind? Things like maybe not judge too quickly, or being open to learning, and having a bit of patience, perhaps, right? Because not everything's going to be instant, and it's a process, right? So just a couple of tips if you're on the recruiting side, and a couple of tips if you're sort of the incoming side. Any final?
Look, I'll quickly start on the Gen Z entering the workforce. Please be patient with the rest of us. We're not as digitally native as we didn't spend our time on the potty holding an iPad, and our concept of exclusivity and diversity is not quite up to your standards yet, but we are working on it. We do know that inclusivity and diversity are huge for creative thinking. So companies should not be looking at diversity from a PR perspective, but actually realize it's genuine quality of diversity. And this is what we need to learn, but Gen Z seem to inherently understand. And that is, it's the diversity of ideas that give us the creative thinking. And so diversity is absolutely critical, but some of us have to learn it, and some of us are going to be born with understanding of it. On the manager's side, or the leader's side, as I said, I've got a couple of Gen Zs in my family, and and one of their friends has just got a job with a very, one of the biggest companies in the world, a tech company. It doesn't matter who, but one of the top three. Sure. And I said, "Wow, you've landed it big. I mean, what are you going to do?" And he said, "I'll probably stay there for a year or two if they look after me." And I thought, most people would kill to get a job in this company, and your attitude is, well, I'll stay if they look after me. And so, warning to any company, don't treat people like crap anymore. It's time. Gen Z expect the brands to take a stand, which is beautiful. They want to be ethical right from start to finish, not just, they won't put up with any greenwashing or whitewashing. They want to see integrity in you as a leader. They want to see integrity in your brand, and they want to know that you're actually genuine and have some meaning about your life. There's some great research where they asked leaders, what do they think employees want? And their attitude was money. And when they asked the Gen Z, they said, we want meaning, and we want training and development. Not technical training and development, but the soft skills that we're talking about. There's nothing I enjoy more than coming out of a workshop where someone says, that didn't just help me make money for the company, but that helped my marriage, it helped my family, it helped my relationship with my parents and my kids. The sort of skills that we need to be teaching in corporate need to go beyond just making you a better salesperson. And I think Gen Z are really going to lap that up, and we need to give it to them. It's not just about putting you in a workshop so you can make us more money. It's about, we do genuinely care about you, and we do want to develop you as people. And if we do invest that time in you, maybe you will give us a little bit of loyalty. But be warned, as I said, my daughter's friend who said, I'll stay as long as they look after me. Be careful. We need to look after them and not just treat people as workers, but actually part of a team, give them meaning, which is great because it means that companies that are genuinely making a difference in the world will attract the best, most creative people. And therefore, as a leader, you need to start thinking about your mission, vision, and values beyond just making money.
Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah, what a great, I hope that all our listeners are tuning in to say that, it isn't about trying to assess the creativity, it's the environment, right, which hopefully fosters the creativity. And of course, on the Gen Z side, come with a bit of patience, and look for that open mind to learn from this side of the fence as well. Now, Thank you again, Andrew. You've done a lot of work on creativity. You've written books, you've delivered programs, you've given keynotes. Just as a way to conclude, where can people find you, reach to you to understand the world of creativity a little more?
Well, the two books we've written, and you can Google them, are called Who Killed Creativity and How to Get It Back. So that's an easy one to remember. And the second book, which we touched on, is called The Innovation Race, How to Change the Game to Change a Culture. One day we'll have to talk about the difference between creativity and innovation, but not today. And my name's Andrew Grant. My partner's Dr. Jaya Grant with a G-A-I-A. But probably the easiest place is just to find us on our company website, which has been around for 20 odd years, and that is Tyrian.com. That's Tyrian, Tyrian.com, and you'll find the books. We have, as we mentioned before, developed what we're calling collaborator canvases, where leaders who can't necessarily engage us through time, distance, or cost can actually go on and use one of these collaborator canvases. The Who Killed Creativity is up as a Miro board canvas. The Innovation Race is up as a Miro board canvas, and just use these as diagnostic tools, or what I call discussion starters, to have that honest and genuine discussion with their team, to really try and talk about how are we going to navigate down that exploring, preserving part of the road. Who killed creativity? How are we going to get it back? What are the different cultures and countries and companies that are doing well on innovation? And they are also all available as collaborator canvases. And you can see them on the Tyrian.com website, or even collaboratorcanvas.com. So there are a few ways to find us. I think if you just Google us or ChatGPT us, you might find us somewhere along the line.
Yeah, thank you again. So there you have it, friends. This a plethora of resources available. You can look it up online, the website, the videos are there, the books are there, and of course, lots of good programs in very innovative, creative ways to build that creative muscle. So, Andrew, it's been fabulous. I really enjoyed it. I think we will plan for a part 2 of this at some stage, as you said, to dive deeper on sustaining.
Well, maybe we better get my better half in here. She's the brains and the beauty. She's everything.
Okay, absolutely. So I think that'll be of a lot of curiosity for our listeners. So thank you once again, Andrew. Really good reconnecting with you, and looking forward to more such conversations and work together perhaps very soon now in the post-COVID world. Okay, take care and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much.